Welcome to Game Theorem, where we have serious discussions about absurd entertainment.
I was just listening to a true crime podcast.
You mean listening to someone's personal tragedy?
What do you mean?
It was about murder, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was so cool. There was so much death and stuff.
Exactly.
What?
I'm Kira.
Oh, I'm supposed to feel bad because they were real people.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm Kyle. Okay, I'm done. I'm done doing that.
Neither of us ever actually listened to true crime.
Okay, so I know we just did a flippant skit there, like we do with most of our wide looks, but I do want to do a disclaimer up front for any of those of you who stuck with it, particularly anyone who likes the true crime genre or anything relating to that. Now, I would say that I know many good people that I respect who like true crime. I would say that, but there are no good people I respect who like true crime.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a coincidence.
I think...
However, look, I am sure such people exist. So what I'm saying is, if you listening to this right now, enjoy this. We're not calling you a bad person. I think of it like vegetarianism. I mean, I'm someone that loves chicken and eats meat and whatnot, right? Mm-hmm. But it's factually a worse thing in many respects than eating plants. Mm-hmm. We accept it as a vice. It doesn't make you wholly a bad person, but it is a vice. And I think that's really the angle we're going with, is that the true crime genre is itself a vice.
We should call this episode True Crime Vice. Or Vice True Crime. You know, like those cop shows that say like Miami Vice or something like that.
Why do they do that? Are they just picking up off of the word?
That's the name of the... I think that's the name of the department or whatever.
I don't even know. Where's that come from? I just think of Grand Theft Auto.
I don't know either, but I think they're the ones.
There's a magazine, there's a movie. That word is used so much.
I don't even know what that word actually means.
It comes from the Bible, because so many things do.
Well, yes, but like, what does that mean in a police context?
The police were formed by a puritanical American state. That's what it means. Okay.
Oh my God.
Why don't we get on with the episode, Kira?
All right. So, we're going to start with a definition of the true crime genre, which is basically any sort of media that are in-depth analysis of real crime that happens. And it's almost always murder. These usually take a crime that is noteworthy for the motive, method, or some kind of novelty about it, and tell the story of what happened using public records and or interviews with the people involved.
Right. And
that's not always what it is, but
I mean, true crime has been around for a while. TV shows, movies, even books.
Actually, the basis of true crime, I believe, personally, is culturally, is the detective mysteries that they used to have, where they would write them in such... Yes, but they would write them in such a way where the audience was supposed to guess who did it, or something like that. And so those kinds of dramas and stuff, I think, were really the start of where it started talking about real ones.
Yeah, I don't think that's fair, because I think that's maybe that's the precursor to it. But I think when it's fictional, it's a very different thing that we're talking about.
Okay, perhaps then I would say more like it is news stories that would sensationalize specific cases, and they would talk about it on the news over and over again. Maybe that could be the origin.
I mean, I do think that news stories do basically what true crime does. But I think that really came along with the advent of the 24-hour news cycle, where there was just so little news to have that they couldn't simply report on things happened. They had to pontificate. They had to basically make a narrative.
I mean, that's fair, but like I'm thinking of like sensationalist stories of like the Black Dahlia murders or something like that back in the 40s. Did they have television?
Well, I think it's fair to say that true crime did exist in a printed medium at first.
Yeah, that's what that's what I mean.
Yes. But we'll have to start talking about, you might have it in your notes here, Kira. Thanks for doing the notes for this one.
Yeah.
I'm a little scared about this one. We might talk about how it intersects with news and history, but I wanted to talk about podcasts. True crime is the number one podcast genre. And
You know why?
why?
Cause like it's so easy to just read up on all this stuff online and then just sit there in front of a mic speculating and
But
talking
you can
about
do
it.
that with so many different subjects. Why do it with murder?
Because it sells.
I really like podcasts. I listen to them all the time. You know, we're making one.
Yeah.
But I've never been able to listen to it. Have you? Have you listened to it?
No, I've absolutely never been able to listen to true crime podcasts.
What
Like,
about any other media?
there's TV shows that I've had on around me.
But you don't like them either.
No, I never set out to watch them because I never really liked them. So the most experience I have is with those kinds of shows being like on in the periphery and therefore experiencing the story despite me not choosing to watch it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So, you want to talk about the subgenres of true crime?
Yes, and by the way, later on I think we will get into why true crime is so popular.
Okay.
We're gonna go with like 3 different subgenres of true crime. One is
Are you saying that because there could be more than just these 3? These are just 3 we're isolating?
Yes, obviously. But these are just the major ones. I mean, I guess there could be unique works that's not based off of these.
Genres are a fuzzy categorization system to begin with. So, yeah, we'll cut you some slack.
Yeah. All right, so one of them is retelling the story of a crime, making it more dramatic and dissecting the lives of the murderer and the victim. This is usually more common. Stuff like Wicked Attraction, I Almost Got Away with It, and basically every other show currently running or that has ever run on the Investigation Discovery Network. Because yes, apparently there is an entire TV network dedicated to true crime shows. That's
Wow.
literally all they show.
Wow. So, what's another one?
Another one is more investigative stories, focused on the viewpoint of a detective trying to figure out who the murderer is, or a criminologist who is more preoccupied with dissecting the psychology and sociology that causes murderers to commit their crimes. Examples would be Dateline, many podcasts, and some documentaries.
I mean, we've done a How Stuff Works episode before because I listened to a lot of their podcasts and they were bought out, whatever. But they did like Atlanta Monster, the Zodiac Killer, the Happy Face Murderers. I've heard so many ads for these things, so many, and every time they play an ad, it's just like I do not ever want to listen to that. Even the ad makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, because it's literally you see it from the perspective of like, oh, I'm an amateur detective telling the story of this crime.
Which I think gives credence to your idea of like the whole noir detective novels.
Yeah, and like that's often how these podcasts go, but sometimes they'll even try to take it like, oh, we're being highbrow and talking about how and why criminals commit their crimes and like the brain of a killer, you know, that kind of stuff. And even when you take it to that level, it's just like you're still just trying to analyze the life of the murderer instead of the victim, I guess, this time.
I mean, it sounds very prosecutorial, if that's a word. You ever want to be a prosecutor in a court of law? This is the podcast for you. At least some of them take it from a more sympathetic perspective, but even then that can get a little weird.
Yeah.
You just keep talking, Kara.
Yeah. All right. And this last type is shows where you follow street cops directly doing police work as cases occur. Examples are Cops, Live PD, and The First 48.
I'd even wager to mention that Cops is where, if not the origin of true crime, it's where our current media ecosystem comes from. It proliferated it because Cops was just a propaganda machine. Just like it was just fodder for rich white people to watch. Like, oh, look at all the poors get arrested. Mm-hmm. And I know this because my rich white family loved watching it. Mm-hmm. And it always made me uncomfortable, even as a kid.
Yeah. Yeah, I was really uncomfortable with it too. Like, I never wanted to watch it. But when it was on, like, I would be very uncomfortable when it was.
Uh-huh. And not only that, but like, they literally edit out any scenes that make the cops not look good.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine, because it's an edited show.
Yeah, it's police propaganda. It's not about strictly murder. It's kind of its own thing, which is why I see you listed as a different subgenre.
Mm-hmm. And, like, have you ever heard of the First 48?
No, never.
It's about missing persons cases, because the first 48 hours after a missing persons case is brought to the police's attention are the most important to finding them. And that's the focus of the show.
You know those like dumb cop shows, or not the cop shows, like CSI and CIS, those ones? Those
ones that fictionalize the hell out of crime scene investigators.
Yeah. Oh, we probably should have put some trigger warnings at the beginning of this episode. Sorry, lots of death and stuff, and bigotry probably is going to come up at some point. Mm-hmm. Very sorry about that, but here it is now. It's late. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, yes, yeah, and those shows are usually terrible. Mm-hmm. In a myriad of ways. I've seen so many things, like taking clips from NCIS and just poking fun at like how awful and like how. Look up the two people one keyboard scene. It's horrible. Anyway, there was a show, I remember this just now coming up in my brain, called The Real NCIS, and this goes to what you were saying, Kira, of like the real relation of our realistic, our fictional media ecosystem next to this true crime stuff based on reality, where it was a spin-off from the TV show where there was the NCIS show. They made the real NCIS show that was basically a cops knockoff.
Wow. I didn't know there was a show like that.
I
never watch NCIS.
Look,
I watched some CSI, the original one.
I have not been looking forward to this podcast episode, and I don't appreciate that this has made me remember that I knew about that thing. I want to forget
it. Okay.
So let's get this over with. Next section.
All right, yeah, we're going to start our issues with true crime.
Although we've been kind of riffing on it.
Mm-hmm. One of our main issues with true crime, though, is consent.
As always, consent is always the biggest issue when it comes to living in the real world with other human beings.
Yeah. Basically, there is no legal requirement for any true crime media to get permission from people close to the victim or victims to produce the content that they make. Public footage from news networks, or even just stuff that was released to the public by the police, can be used without the consent of anyone involved.
I think this really reveals significant holes with the United States, at least. Maybe other countries as well. Probably other countries, but I can speak from America, an American perspective, that we just have such a lack of privacy laws. Like, because to me, we've gotten so used to our data being mined in general that we just go like, oh yeah, of course this company's going to know about this and that company's going to know about that and the authorities are going to know about that. Hey, NSA, how's it going? But
we joke that that each of us have an assigned FBI person surveilling us constantly.
But the problem with that is you might have acclimated that towards your own life while you're alive. But what about when you die and you're no longer able to give that consent? You've already given it away. And what if you die gruesomely in a way that afterwards, if you had survived it, you would have been like, no, I don't want that to be shared. That was like literally the worst moment in my entire life. Please don't share that. But you're dead, so you can't do it. And since they're basically privacy is people, the authorities act like privacy doesn't exist. They can just go and use it. That's just how it happens.
Now I'm remembering the show called Stupidest Criminals or something like that, where they would take CCTV footage of people being idiots and committing crimes and dissect it. And I realized that, how did they get that CCTV footage? I definitely know that no one in that footage was actually involved in giving permission.
And we're not even talking about like private areas and like owned places. We're talking like public areas. Like the argument with privacy is like, oh, well, if you're in a public area, then you should expect that your visuals will be seen by other people. But if you're in a private area owned by another person, well, it's their place. You can't control whether they monitor you. It's like, it seems like no matter where I am, you have a justification for recording me.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was just saying that the whole fact of like this applying to dead bodies and people who are murdered isn't surprising at all. I think it's the logical end of our lack of effective privacy protection.
Yeah, I could see that. I didn't make that connection before, but now that you talked about it, yeah, I see that. Sometimes in these shows, people close to the victim will be interviewed for these TV shows. However, the footage is often manipulated for added drama, as the forms these people sign when they're interviewed let producers edit it however they want. So, like, even if you sit down and interview with someone and are just telling the facts of what happened to someone close to you because you want their story told or whatever, or even just because you wanted to be on TV and they're doing a story or whatever, like, they can still take that footage and do whatever they want with it.
Well, look, okay, I'm taking the mic away from Kira now because I got to do a one-on-one with you listeners. So what Kira just said now was completely ridiculous. In fact, it makes me want to go right now and find out next time on Game Theorem.
Oh my god, you're terrible.
Come on, because they always did that. They would cut off right before they actually said the point. You get what I mean?
My god, you're terrible.
I was just trying to make the joke.
Awful.
I thought it was a little clever. No?
It's hilarious. You're adorable. Let's move on.
Thank you.
All right, so this is like you brought this up before, but that like the victim cannot consent to their murder being turned into entertainment.
Yeah, and that's a tricky issue because you're talking about consent after death. But I feel like focusing on that too much is really not worth our time because it's not like consent during your life is taken that seriously either.
Yeah, that's true.
But it's just very easy to exploit because they could just simply be like, well, they couldn't say yes if they wanted to, so let's just go and do it anyway.
Yeah. I just personally think it's very disrespectful, especially for murder victims, because like people pick apart the circumstances of their death so much.
I mean, I'd like to talk about eventually the right way to do this, if there is one. But let's get through all the issues first, and then we can circle back around to that.
And that reminds me that how much time has to pass before it becomes a historical thing?
Oh, that's basically what I was just wondering.
Because like you have these history shows that will talk about crimes and stuff that happened in history, I guess, while they're talking about people. Like, for example, Aaron Burr shooting Hamilton.
Or JFK being shot.
Yeah.
Or Archduke Ferdinand.
Yes, exactly.
William McKinley.
These assassinations, yeah.
I mean, and so is that the bar, that they have to be political assassinations that have to affect world history? But how big is world history? Like, how important do these events have to go? Like, I'm sure at the time, William McKinley's death didn't really seem, it was just one president in one country. Maybe important in America, but world history? But America would go on to affect the world, you know? Like, all these things, they affect each other. And, like, you can have, you know, the murder of a trans person. It very unfortunately happens. And you might write that person off, but I would argue, why is that person any less valuable to the telling of history? I would argue that they are very valuable. Like, I mean, valuable is a weird word to use there. Sorry, but significant. How about that? I could imagine a documentary about like the murdered trans people of New York and telling their stories, and I could imagine that being very beautiful and not offensive.
Because it's focusing on the victims, not telling the story of their murderer.
Oh, that is a good point. So is the important thing focusing on the victims then? Because in all those cases I just mentioned, we didn't even talk about the killers.
Yeah, you know what? Now that I think about it, you're right. I think that's the important difference.
We don't want to glorify it? Huh.
I'll get it more into that later on, actually.
All right, well, I guess just keep talking then. I'm going to think about this.
All right. One example of like real murder imagery in media is Telltale's Batman was going to use a real image of an assassinated Russian diplomat in the game. Is it ethical to use dead people's images this way?
Absolutely not.
Yeah. What about, for example, the Black Dahlia murders in L.A. Noire? Those were real. That was a real case that happened around that time period.
I think absolutely not.
Yeah.
I'm kind of going off my gut here, though.
Well, I think they fictionalized it because the real one was literally so awful that they couldn't put that in a game.
Oh, well, then I'm okay with it.
Yeah, they just took the surrounding circumstances and kind of wrote their own story. Because technically those murders were never solved.
I mean, we're talking about events in fiction that are made with, you know, graphics. And it's not like they're fictionalizing those stories. They just take place in a world where those murders happened. It's, you know, alternate timeline kind of stuff.
Yeah, I suppose so. I think it's more acceptable in that case. You're right. Because I realized as I was saying it that, yeah, no, I know about the real case and it's different than the one they presented in LA Noire.
I mean, it'd be like if you were playing a video game and in the video game, your character pulls out a book and you see the book and it's talking about the murder of Archduke Ferdinand that ended up catapulting the world into World War II. Or was it 1 or 2?
I
oh my
don't
goodness,
know.
was it 1 or 2? Oh no.
I think 1. It had to be 1.
Yeah, 1. Nazis was 2. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry about that. So I could imagine that happening, and I think that would be perfectly fine. It's not like they're fictionalizing the story. And I think part of this has to do with accurately representing history, because otherwise it becomes revisionist history, right? Right? So I think maybe we were talking about perspective of the victims. We were talking about whether it's in history, but I think also another important factor to consider is whether you are genuinely trying to be accurate or you're going to fictionalize. Fictionalizing, I think, gets very problematic, right?
Yeah, it can be.
Especially if you're just grossly inaccurate and you're misrepresenting the story. But to get to the point I was saying about this video game character reading about Archduke Ferdinand, if he opened that book, if your character opened that book, and there was a picture of the actual Archduke getting shot in the head, I don't think that's okay.
Yeah.
Because this is a fictional world you've made with your own graphics and everything. You know, someone's painted every texture in that game or photosourced it, whatever. Getting an actual real world photo of a murder, historical or not, seems to me like you could have just easily taken the little bit of extra time to mock up your own picture that would be less offensive and egregious. Knowing the alternative would have been so easy to do is what I think makes it particularly offensive. Just like that Hitman body.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, that real life person's human corpse being used. I say Hitman. What was it? Batman. Telltale Batman. Really? That was the game it was in?
Yeah, I don't I don't know why they decided to do that. That was yeah.
Well, Telltale's no more, so.
But
Actually, that's a bit of a sad story, but whatever.
yeah. But I do agree with your argument there, especially in the way that Eleanor fictionalizes it enough and creates its creates its own story with it that it's okay.
Well, it doesn't. I want to. I don't know if you want to use the word fictionalize. It has its own fictional narrative that does not fictionalize the actual history that happens to take place within the fiction.
I don't understand what you mean there.
Well, L.A. Noire is a fictional narrative as a video game, right? Mm-hmm. It has a fictional narrative.
Yes.
That resembles very much the past of the real world.
Uh-huh.
And as such contains history within it that it does not fictionalize because the history is true to the real world, which is separate from the fictional narrative.
Uh-huh.
Just like we could have a video game that's about like 9/11 that takes place in 2001, and the story's just about this one man coping with the event.
Mm-hmm. It's like historical fiction.
Yes. That man wasn't real. We wrote him for the story, but 9/11 did happen, and you don't want to misrepresent it in that story. Mm-hmm. Same way with these other murders and events.
Yeah, there's actually movies about that. I remember this release, and sorry.
Although, you know what? I can think of a counterpoint to that.
Yeah.
I remember when I was watching the movie Valkyrie, which was the one with Tom Cruise that...
oh, yeah. We watched that one together.
Yeah, it's the one where he's... what's his name? Stauffenberger? No, that's not even close. I forget what his name is, but he's like one of the most famous German war heroes because he opposed the Nazis during World War II and tried to lead an insurrection to defeat Germany from within. You know, there's a whole monument that about like the German people's shame with the Nazis and whatnot, and how like this man did not stay silent. He fought them, you know, stuff like that, right? Mm-hmm. And the movie's interesting. It's very Americanized, but one thing about that was like the movie was so compelling in his story of trying to kill Hitler and defeat the Nazis that you really, really wished by the end that it was an alternate history story.
Yeah, that it was more fictionalized.
Because right at the end you find out, boom, he failed. Of course he failed. This is World War II. That's not how World War II ended.
Yeah.
But you're so enraptured in his story that you wish he didn't.
Uh-huh.
So if they had written it to where he didn't, and it was like twist ending, surprise, alternate timeline, would that have been offensive?
I don't think so. It would have been nice because, like, it's a fictional history story. So, like, yeah.
Oh, maybe. Okay, you know what? Maybe because it's not the misrepresentation, because there's clearly the implication that you know how World War II actually ended. Mm-hmm. They're not trying to be like, did you know actually?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Yeah, so, which is...
Like with Hamilton, the events that Hamilton does is like, not all of it exactly happened that way. It's just trying to tell you history in a fun and interesting way.
Mm-hmm. And I think that gets to maybe some relationship between the audience and the material itself, which is largely established by advertising.
I mean, so.
What's the difference between like, oh, I'm going to watch this movie that is about you know, Tom Cruise, Valkyrie, Nazis, and whatnot, and let's just say like, oh, and it has an alternate ending, surprise twist, right? Versus oh, I'm going to watch this show that keeps telling me, like, do you want to find out how this person got killed? Listen, you'll find out the whole story, right? Where you're being advertised to under the presumption that you're going to learn the truth of what really happened. True crime sells itself on true. It has true in the name.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely true.
You stopped right before saying it. You walked right into that one.
Maybe.
All right, you want to talk about some more points?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the fictionalization that true crime does that makes it not so true. This fictionalization could be in a lot of different forms. It could be like just the podcast host speculating on a crime and being like, I think this happened. And this can especially happen with like cold cases or, those cases that were never solved. That kind of thing. What they'll do is like, oh, I'm going to try to give you the most accurate presentation of what happened. But because it was never solved or it's a cold case or whatever, I'm also going to throw in a bunch of wild speculation and what my opinion is on what the truth of the case is.
For what it's worth, I think there's a way to do that that's not very offensive.
I guess, yeah.
I think someone as a enthusiastic amateur could look at all the facts, tell you those facts, and then try to string them into what they think is the narrative of what happened. And
yeah,
I think
the problem with it is when they do this, and it's irresponsible, because what you're talking about is more journalism, whereas if you speculate and stuff, you're getting into throw out every wild theory you think of along the way. It gets to the point where like it sways the public's opinion
and I think,
on the victims or the murder or whatever.
I think this goes back to our talk about truth and misrepresentation. I think you just illustrate a very good divide between two versions of the speaker's intent. Are they speculating or are they observing? And even like journalists can have opinions. A journalist can observe all the facts and then tell you, based on what I've experienced, this is what I think happened. But I think people understand journalists are beholden to facts.
Yeah.
And so if the journalist starts going on by like, I just have a gut feeling that they were misunderstood and ignoring all the facts they have seen before them, I could see that being questionable.
Yeah, the thing is that along the way, before they even know the full story, these people will speculate wildly and talk about it the entire time. Whereas with journalists, you tend to do all your research, and then at the end of all your research, based on everything that you've just learned, then you sort of form an opinion on what your story is about.
I mean, maybe, but I do think there's a different relationship with the truth that journalists kind of have to have a high standard for. And I mean, after all, it works. Why do you think so many corporations are firing off their journalists? Because they don't want people to report on them. Why do you think so many countries are trying to kill journalists? Russia. Because journalists are, I think, some of the best people that do actual good work in this world.
Yeah.
But there's many people that are definitely not journalists that claim to be such, and they are very hated by actual journalists because they misrepresent the position, because they're misrepresenting truth itself. And that can be very dangerous. And I think you don't have to be one of those people to be a problem.
Yeah.
You can be just an amateur that's inadvertently causing those problems.
Yeah, definitely. Another form of this fictionalization is when shows will like hire actors and literally do dramatizations. That's literally what they call them, of things that happened, up to and including to like literally having them pretend to act out the actual murder.
Okay, and I get why with murder that sounds bad, but I've seen dramatizations of like historical events. How is that different?
Because they're historical. They're not like...
But we just talked about what is history anyway.
It's an important distinction, even if you don't know exactly where to draw that line.
I mean, I guess, but I want to know where to draw the line. I think it's important.
I think if anyone in the dramatization or with it is still very much alive and still very much able to tell the story, then it's kind of unethical to do that instead of just getting the story from someone else.
I mean, that's a point. This is complicated.
Yeah, I've read something about like what's the difference between grave digging and archaeology, and people arguing when does it become archaeology, and they kind of settled on the point of like when everyone that has known your name ever is dead, when no one who is alive knows who you were, then that's sort of when it becomes archaeology.
Maybe it's just not the clear distinction we think it is. There is no line. It's a bit blurry.
Yeah, fair enough. I can agree with that.
And I think we can agree that like grave robbing is probably bad, at least in most cases, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of like what's the good way to grave rob. But
duh.
What?
When like a rich person decides to get buried with all their money and crap
okay.
because they're selfish, greedy hoarders.
Egyptian tombs.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're in the archaeology. But
I'm joking.
I think we could go like yeah, grave robbing and archaeology are two different things at two different ends of a spectrum. Just like doing a reenactment of a historical scene, even when one with death, versus a recent murder. And I mean recent, I mean like it was not like national headlines and it was an individual's death that at least most people would say wouldn't matter in the long run. Not that I would say that. And that, you know, within the past like X amount of decades, like again, it's fuzzy. It's hard for me to define this, but I definitely think those are two different things. One of them is okay, one of them is not, and it's blurry in between.
Yeah, fair enough.
Maybe this just needs to summarize as like you just gotta show respect, you know?
Yeah, because like if there's anyone alive who would be re-traumatized or offended at the way you portrayed the person they knew's death or anything involving that, then obviously you did something wrong. And if there's even the possibility of that, then just don't do it.
And you know what? Like, let's say that someone in the story that you're depicting or talking about is truly a monster, right? You don't need to fictionalize that if you have enough facts to show their monstrous behavior. Be like, well, it's weird in the dramatization that the guy like ripped that child's head off. It's like, well, I mean, that was an actual fact in the coronary. Like you didn't have to fictionalize that, so you don't have to try to spin him as the monster. It's self-evident.
Yeah, fair enough. But this fictionalization sometimes lead to them like sympathizing with the murderer, in that they'll like criminologists especially sometimes get into this where they'll like get to the point where they're analyzing the murderer's life so much that they're making excuses for their behavior.
Okay, can I talk about that for a bit?
Sure.
You wanted to say something else first?
This is where it sort of intersects with race, but I want to talk about that. So, like, let me talk about my example. All right. After you're done.
Oh, okay. So I just wanted to say, though, that, like, the whole idea of having a tragic backstory is something that I think people give a bad name. Like, it's not inherently a bad thing to do, but the way that it's employed in fiction as well as true crime is sometimes disgusting. Because what you don't want to do is have an evil character or actual person and then try to justify them as having a tragic backstory, you know? Like, for like a real person, for example, like, I don't know anything about the person, but let's just say the Zodiac Killer, okay? Again, I don't know the truth behind the story, but let's say that he was just horrible serial killer. Maybe that's what actually happened. I don't know. I haven't read up on it.
I never have either.
Yeah. Okay. But
Well, since you're giving an example, do you want to talk about my example?
well, hold on.
Okay.
Okay, let's just say serial killer A then. So serial killer A killed a bunch of people. And if you want to like romanticize that and give it a tragic backstory, it's like, well, serial killer A went through that, and that, and it was a horrible upbringing. First of all, do you know that? But let's just say that did happen. Let's say serial killer A actually did go through those things. It doesn't make him not serial killer A, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe there actually was some amount of mental illness that gets into it, but it's dangerous to perpetuate the narrative that mentally ill people are going to become serial killers, because it seems rare to actually have just talk about someone that's mentally ill, unless you're going to then spin that into a villainous type of murderer character, and at least in the true crime genre.
Mm-hmm. And this is another huge problem in media, because then it's like, oh, all mentally ill people are evil and like they turn out like this and they're awful.
Mm-hmm. But again, I don't think it's necessarily bad to have the tragic backstory. I think,
especially when you're just like, these are the facts of what happened to this person.
I mean, like we could talk about like maybe serial killer A was abused, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're going to do that, have the takeaway be explicitly not that all abused people end up serial killer A. You don't even want to imply that. It's a bad message.
Yeah, exactly.
But,
that's what you're getting at.
But you could still bring it up with the idea that let's learn from this and not have kids be abused.
Yeah.
For even the chance that this might happen. Mm-hmm. But I'm saying that like even like if it's real, if it's not even real, then what are you doing here? I mean, like let's look at fiction, for example, and like the Joker, right? Okay. The reason the Joker doesn't have a tragic backstory is because it wouldn't make sense. The Joker is supposed to be like
apparently in the new one, it's capitalism that's the villain.
Well, I've heard very mixed things about the new one. But
yeah.
But my point is like it's why the Joker has a different backstory every time. And every different appearance, the Joker has a different backstory. Mm-hmm. They have tried to play with it in the past, and I'm not going to make a judgment call on that because I don't know enough. Mm-hmm. But like if the reason that they have a different backstory is because it's not like any one of these things made the Joker. The Joker is himself who he is. All of his actions are attributable to him. You don't need to attribute it to mental illness or child abuse, even capitalism. Like mm-hmm. they're all different things. Mm-hmm. And it's not that we can't use those ideas. I mean, obviously they have been using them in various media, mm-hmm. but you don't want to scapegoat your villain for an easy narrative, and I think that's what's important. You know, one of the Batman movies from like a decade ago literally makes fun of this, where the Joker every time he's asked for his backstory lies in the movie and makes up a different one.
Oh, really?
Yes,
that's hilarious.
Okay, so I'm going to be quiet now while Kira talks about race.
Yeah. Basically, what I'm going to start with is this fictionalization around the murderers or killers has caused there to be this sort of incredibly weird and awful subculture around serial killers. Like, people literally get obsessed with them.
Like fanatics.
Yes, exactly. And one of the reasons this is so bad is because the only reason that these serial killers specifically are, you know, romanticized and like analyzed so much is because they're well-off white cis het white men who everyone assumes is the default and therefore everyone projects onto. Can
I interject before you get to the race part?
Yeah.
Because I have a fun fact about race and whatnot, because you're saying they're white men. Mm-hmm. There's this, it's an interesting fact that most serial killers are indeed white. Mm-hmm. At least in America. You tell them.
You know why? Because white men can get away with almost anything. Because what happens is they don't get caught because they manage to not have the police pull them over or look specifically for someone like them or anything like that. You know Ted Bundy? He was not particularly smart or charismatic or anything. He just knew how to manipulate women's kindness, and the police refused to investigate when several women reported their suspicions about him because they had a profile on this killer and they thought it could only be a hardened, deranged criminal. And
I just wanted to interject.
yeah.
What you're basically saying is, to a police officer, 10 women's words are not worth one man's.
I guess, but he never even had to defend himself because they just didn't take them seriously.
Yeah, but he would have, and like his it wasn't even worth his hypothetical word because they never had to seek it. And I think that just shows you, like, if it takes 10 women speaking or however many it was, and they still don't believe that over one man's hypothetical word, it means that the man is 10 times more likely to get away with it.
Exactly. And it was because he seemed like a normal guy that they didn't take this suspicion seriously, i.e. cis white straight man with no previous criminal record. The only reason that Bundy actually got caught was that a woman was assigned to the case and found these other women who were suspicious of specifically him beforehand, and she went against their assumptions about who the murderer could be. And that's how it was solved. Literally, that's how it was. A woman was assigned to the case and took the women seriously.
Is there anything else you want to talk about with race? Because it seemed like it was mostly on gender.
Well, it was basically because he was white, like, they never suspected him. Like, I'm sure if you asked any of those police officers what they thought the murderer of those women looked like, they would have rattled off, and then you would ask them, what color skin does that person have? They would have not a single one of them would have said white. Not a single one of them. Because it's just, white people are presumed innocent until guilty. Everyone else are presumed guilty until proven innocent.
You're not wrong.
Yeah, that's literally how cops see it. And this is proof that that's how cops see it. Because the only reason he got away with it for so long, we may never know the amount of women he actually killed. And the only reason is because they were incompetent and didn't want to believe that it could be this guy. Because they looked like this guy. They identified with him.
I get your frustration, but maybe we should bring it back to the concept of true crime.
Yeah, all right. The news actually does this kind of thing as well, not just true crime media. Like, for example, a good example is...
And I just wanted to say, I don't think either of us, has any problem questioning whether the news is ethical. It's not, right?
Yes. I was going to explain how the news does this. They do this with shootings. White male shooters will be called mentally ill, and everything about their past will get drug up as an excuse for what they did. And even horrible, horrible white men who burn their families alive. This is an actual case, recently happened. A sports ball player, I don't even remember what sport he played, burned his ex-wife and little girls alive. And they had a beautiful family picture of them all together as the news story. I guarantee you, if he wouldn't have been white, they would have done a mugshot like they do for every petty crime that a brown person gets arrested for.
I mean, yeah, Here's a little game theorem follow-up for you, but I recently had another confrontation with my mother, just me and her one-on-one, because I was trying to convince her to vote for Bernie. Mm-hmm. And it didn't work, obviously.
Yeah.
But she heard me out. It was something, whatever. I asked her what issues were important to her, and she says national security. Of course she does.
Wow.
So I start talking about terrorism, in both foreign and domestic. And, we talk about, gun violence and whatnot. And she gets tripped up at the part where I start talking about all the white supremacist terrorists. And she's like, but that's not terrorism. That's just crime.
Excuse me? It's literally terrorism. It's a hate crime against a specific group of people.
But it shows you how racist a lot of people are. And, she's a white woman. Literally, white women are the prime target audience for true crime. I don't know if you mentioned this, but yeah.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. I remember hearing that somewhere. But white women watch true crime more than anyone else. And I just feel it's really telling that literally her preconception, even if she doesn't realize it herself, and I quite frankly don't care if she does, but it's racist. It's you're a terrorist based on whether on the color of your skin.
Exactly. And that's ridiculous because literally the goal of these attacks are the same. Like, they're militant alt-right. They're literally the same as if a brown person was a militant Islamist and came here.
Well, they don't even have to be alt-right. I mean, they are. They tend to almost always be, but they don't even have to be. It's just you going around killing a bunch of people. It's terrorism.
Yeah, exactly.
At least according to the current state.
Yeah, mass shootings are terrorism.
But also it's something that's reinforced by the news, which we've discussed is basically true crime now.
Exactly, because like I said, they'll literally, every single white male shooter, which is almost all of them, they'll go on and on about it, them being a mentally ill, deranged lone wolf. But the second any brown person gets caught in any crime like this, suddenly you're talking about why Muslims don't denounce terrorism, or like the extremism of Islam, and how, it's not Islamophobic, they're literally so horrible, and that kind of stuff.
Right.
It's one brown person being made to represent their entire race, whereas not a single white person is ever responsible for the history of genocide and oppression that white people do.
Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, since apparently we're being attacked by racists on Twitter, you probably should try to make a little bit of a disclaimer here. It doesn't hurt. I know you don't have to, but
Oh yeah, by the way, I'm a person of color, so like I'm literally not coming at this from ignorance.
Mm-hmm. Anything else you want to say?
I guess we could go on to true crime's effect on the real world.
I mean, we kind of talked about it a lot, but what do you think?
I think we should specifically talk about why it's so popular. And I think it's so popular because it allows us to take a step back and not feel a sense of entanglement with these people's lives, but still, like, see the horrors of something that happened. It's the same reason why people go on roller coasters or watch horror movies or anything like that, except it's bad to do because these are real people, but it's the same sort of thriller kind of thing that people do. And
I can't help but think it might be attached to a certain form of smugness.
Yeah, and also, like, I think it's really attached to people who are unempathetic. Because, like, if you're too empathetic, then you can't listen to this, because it's like, I can't sit here and listen to a real person who was killed.
Oh, I definitely think it can appeal to a certain type of narcissism. I wanted to say that I think the reason a lot of white women in particular are amongst the largest demographics for true crime is specifically because the people that watch it or listen to it or consume it can put themselves in that scenario without having to actually do it. Like the kind of like roller coaster thing, the simulacrum kind of idea, where they can be like, oh, well, see, this is what I would have done. And now that I've watched this, I will know if that didn't work out, or my new plan, like, okay, that didn't work. Okay, let's try this. I'll do this. So if that ever happens to me, I'll do this. I am prepared now. And all I had to do was watch someone else's suffering who didn't know better in that situation. And honestly, do you really think that person's going to be better off knowing that now?
Yeah. It's also a lot of like, you made mistakes getting involved with these people and putting yourself in the situation.
There's some
where
judgment,
you-
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And like, another thing is, I think this is kind of the new form of those old radio dramas and books and stuff where they would write detective stories where you could guess who the killer was or something like that. You know, because the way some of these shows present it, they don't tell you who the killer is until, you know, the end or until later. And then they start telling the story of the trial or whatever, you know, but like you don't go into hearing the story of the crime knowing who the bad person is, who the murderer is. And so I feel like this kind of is trying to appeal to that too. In a modern way of like taking an actual modern story that happened.
A whodunit kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, so there's something I want to end it on. So I'm good. Kira, you finish up anything else you want to say?
I'm good.
Are you sure there's nothing else? All right. Well, thank you for everything you've done for this episode, Kira.
No problem.
I wanted to leave off with a question for anyone listening to this. And I am genuinely curious. If you listen or watch true crime and you do think it is valuable to you in some regard, please explain to us why. We've been really harsh on it, and we really don't see anything good in it. Again, I'm certain many of you could be perfectly good people and still enjoy this, what we call a vice. But if you genuinely think that true crime is great for whatever reason, tell us why we're wrong. I would be curious to know if some people think otherwise. Any thoughts on that, Kira?
I think that's very fair because, like, I mean, I like to watch horror. I've watched horror and stuff, but the reason that I'm able to watch it is because it's fiction.
Yeah.
It's fiction. If even those things that say at the beginning, you know, based on true story or whatever, like, I just ignore it because, like, okay, it's fiction. I got it, you know? And that's the only way I'm even able to watch that kind of stuff. So, like, I don't understand how people can watch these real stories.
Yeah, I think the fact that it has real people is the big breaking point with me, regardless of anything else.
Yeah, with me too.
And then you just have to dissect whether it's like history or not, and that's the complicated part. All right, well, I think we're good. This has been Game Theorem. We have a Twitter. It's the @ symbol with the Game Theorems with an S on the end. And then, you go to our website. You can find all our social media. Bye.
Bye.